Hey, what's up players? Calypso from Summoner's War here, and this video is going to be about runes. It's a requested video by Elite Anarchy, and it's a good idea because there are a lot of things that I wish I'd known about runes when starting out that I do now. It took me a while to figure out. We'll start with slot 1 runes, and I just go through each slot and figure out what each slot is for. So, slot 1 runes, their primary stat is always a flat attack. So this one is attack plus 15. Every single slot 1 rune you'll see is a flat attack. And by flat, I mean it's plus, it adds a certain specific amount on top of your attack. The alternative to flat is percent, attack percent. And that's usually more attractive than the flat attack. But every single slot 1 rune, whether it be energy or fatal or focus, it's all going to be flat attack stat. And to get slot 1 runes, you can go to a specific dungeon that drops a specific rune of interest. So swift runes drop into Lane Forest. So if you wanted a swift slot 1 rune, you go to Lane Forest and farm the first stage. And the order of runes depends on the stage. So the first 6 stages, so first one will drop slot 1, second stage will drop slot 2, third stage will drop slot 3, etc., etc. And the boss stage drops any of the 6 slots at random. And the boss stage in Hell mode can drop up to 5-star runes as opposed to 4-star runes. And there's also higher chance of dropping blue or purple runes in the boss stage. And we'll get to what rune rarity means in a second. So slot 2 runes. Slot 2 runes can actually be multiple effects. So there's an attack percent, there's a defense percent. Slot 2 can also be HP percent. The unique stat that slot 2 has is speed. I'm actually going to sell this rune. The unique stat for slot 2 is speed. No other slot rune can have a speed stat. So you'll notice that I have speed swift runes, which are always nice to have, and they're all slot 2. Slot 4 won't have speed. Slot 6 won't have speed. Slots 2, 4, and 6 have some unique stats that are only available for that slot, and we'll get to those in a second. Slot 2, 4, and 6 can also have attack percent, defense percent, and HP percent. So that's what's unique about them. Slot 3 is always going to be flat defense. Just like slot 1 will always be flat attack, slot 3 will always be flat defense. And while we're at slot 3, might as well go to slot 5, which will always be flat HP. So there's not really much you can do in terms of the primary stat for slots 1, 3, and 5. What you want to pay attention to, though, is the substats for these slots, and we'll talk about how you can control substats too. But let's go to slot 4 real quick. Slot 4 has a couple of unique stats that it can have as the primary stat. You can see I have a defense percent here. Defense percent is not unique. Defense percent, HP percent, and attack percent can appear as a primary stat on either slots 2, 4, or 6. The unique stats that slot 4 has, though, one of them is crit rate. So if you wanted crit rate, you can only get that for slot 4. The other one is crit damage. So if you wanted crit damage, you can also only get that in slot 4. Those are the 2 unique stats that slot 4 has. We already went over slot 5, which is flat HP, so nothing too new there. Slot 6, in addition to having attack percent, HP percent, and defense percent as the possibility of a primary stat, you always want percent stats, by the way, whenever possible. You don't want flat stats for slots 2, 4, and 6 runes, unless that flat stat is speed. Then you definitely want that. But for slot 6, you can have accuracy as a primary stat, which is only available for slot 6, or you can have resistance as the primary stat for slot 6. So those are the 2 unique stats for slot 6. So depending on how you want to build your monster, you have to reserve a certain slot for a specific stat. So if I wanted to build my Rama God to be high resist, then I would have to reserve this slot for the resistance primary stat. The other runes I can put HP on if I wanted. So that's a quick rundown of stats. Now about substats. The substats that you get are dependent on the rarity of the rune. Now, the amount of stars that a rune has depends on how high that stat gets. That's what affects how high a stat gets, is how many stars you have. Generally, you want to shoot for 4, 5, or 6 stars, as high amount of stars as possible. 6 stars if you can farm those. The substats will depend on the rarity of the rune. So this is a white rune, and it'll have random substats, because I don't know what the substats are going to be. So when I power up to 3, and I'm just going to go ahead and power this up to show you what I mean. This is a rune I was planning to power up anyways. So when I at the 3rd power up, a random substat will appear. Since it's a white rune, a random substat will appear. And you see that substat in this case is attack percent. Crit rate here doesn't really count as a substat because you can see it's mortal swift rune. So that mortal is what affects the crit rate. Crit rate is what's called an extra stat in this case, because it's a stat that changes the name of the rune. Now, remember, this is a blue rune. It's a rare rune, so it already has 2 substats available, right? Same with this. It already has 2 substats available. This has 3 substats already available. So remember how when we powered up the white rune, a new substat appeared? In this case, an existing substat will be powered up. And if it's a blue rune, both of the existing substats will have a chance to be powered up before a new substat will appear. If it's a purple rune, that's the same thing. Every 3 power-ups, either an existing substat will be powered up, or a new substat will appear. Except for going to plus 15. Plus 15 is different. So, if I were to power up this rune, either crit rate will power up, or attack will power up on plus 3. And same thing on plus 6. Either crit rate or attack will power up. So if I wanted a high crit rate, I would hope that crit rate powers up both on plus 3 and plus 6. See, in this case, crit rate powered up, so I lucked out. Crit damage won't power up because, remember, it's an extra stat that changes the name of the rune. This is Cruel Fatal Rune, and the Cruel name is what adds the crit damage bonus. So if I were to power up to plus 6, again, either crit rate or attack will power up. It's not that since crit rate powered up last time, attack will power up now. No. Well, at plus 6, there's going to be another chance of an existing stat powering up. At plus 9, a new stat will appear. So that's how rarity affects which substats that you get. If you want to find good substats, then find a blue rune or a purple rune with the substats that you want. And then you know that those 3 substats or those 2 substats that show up will be powered up. Now, in my shop right now, I have this Swift rune that I'm probably not going to buy because who uses defense percent Swift except for Beladion, and he's better with violent runes anyway. So if I were to buy this though, and I powered it up to plus 3, since this already has an existing substat, that substat will always be powered up first. So I know that HP as a substat will increase for this rune. So that's why green runes are good, because you know that that specific substat will always be powered up. But that's it on runes. If you want to farm good runes, I recommend doing things like Giant's B9 or Dragon's Lair for violent runes. Dragon's Lair drops more endgame runes like Revenge, Violent, Nemesis, Vampire, and then Giants drops all of the runes up until, I think, about Vrophagus. Oh no, not even Vrophagus. Hyedeni. So it drops all of these up to Hyedeni, and then also Despair runes. Giants drops Despair runes. So those are the stages I would recommend farming. And if you want 4-star runes and you don't mind 4-star runes, then just farm that specific stage that drops them in hell mode, and it'll be easier to find them. But that's a tutorial on runes, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Alright, peace out.